The point of today's talk is you need to join the public Zoom call on August the 18th with 4billiondead.org. It's hosted with Dr. Alec Gilbert, who is a climate scientist and presenter, and Roger Hallam, who is the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion. That's the message. Join this public Zoom call. The rest of this talk will be a bit more of an informal discussion about where we're at, what we can do, and just talking about the situation. 4 billion dead. So first of all, what is the problem and can it be solved? What does the latest data show? What do the risk experts say? And what can we do about it? So we'll start off with this from Andrew Boyd and I Want a Better Catastrophe. I'll leave it to play for a second, but this is essentially the thesis of his book. We're in a predicament, not a solvable problem, and therefore what can we do? So please go to the website, please check it out. The whole thing is great. You can sit down, it's narrated, it's animated. I'll play a short clip of it now.
Is climate change for real? I try not to think about it. Is climate change for real? I try not to think about it, okay? I'll think about it. Nope, it's not for real. Well, you may be in denial. No, I'm not in denial. It's got to be a Chinese hoax. It must be. I don't like your solution, so it can't be true. Isn't the climate always changing? If it gets too bad, God will intervene. You may be in denial. Is climate change for real? Okay, yes. Next question. Are we fucked? I try not to think about it. Are we fucked? I try not to think about it. Are we fucked? Well, not quite yet, but we are definitely in a climate emergency, and we need to start acting like it now. Which obviously begs the question, well, can we fix it? Let's hold off on that and come back to understand better, what do we mean by yet? Are we fucked yet? Because some people are already experiencing the deadly impacts of climate change now, while others, due to geography or privilege, won't be feeling the worst of things for a while yet to come. So are we fucked? Well, what do we mean by we?
Yes, what's happening? First of all, we're in a climate emergency. We are producing gigatons of greenhouse gases, putting up into the atmosphere every year. Here's a visualization by NASA of what that looks like over the whole planet. As it pulses, this is the day-night cycle due to the photosynthesis of plant life. And we've got these other animations that show it from multiple angles of the planet. So here we have the US and South America. Here we have Asia, Australia. You can just see New Zealand. We are included on this map. And then this last one, you can see Europe and Africa. And this is what it looks like. This is a visualization from NASA. So maybe I don't need to do anything. Maybe it's not as bad as I'm telling you. Our leaders are dealing with the climate stuff. Maybe that's what you're thinking. You're not quite up to speed. So here is a color stripe graph showing the increase in carbon dioxide parts per million over the last 50 odd years. And you can see in the graph, these are all the different climate change conferences. So as every single conference has happened, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere has increased. So clearly these are not working. We are not in control of this situation. These clips here, this is this week's, as of the date this video published, this all happened this week. These extreme weather clips are happening now. As of posting, I'm sure there's many more. This is because as the planet warms, we hold approximately 7% more water vapor for every 1 degree in warming. And that is a physical law, or physical relationship rather, that I'll pop up on screen. We're also having the planet's albedo is dropping, so the reflectivity of the planet is dropping as ice melts and the planet heats. The planet is also hitting maximum record amounts of precipitable water vapor in the atmosphere, which this graph shows, so expect a lot more floods, more frequent and more extreme. So the 3 hottest years in human history have just happened, and during that time, media coverage, TV coverage in the US particularly, dropped 65%. So while these crises are happening, it's not being covered. They aren't making the link on the news. Here in New Zealand, they cover these fires, these floods, as isolated events, and as you can see, they're still playing. No link in most mass media sites to why this is happening. So it's an existential risk. In a previous video, we covered the 2025 State of the Climate Report by William Ripple and colleagues. Just for a very quick refresher, They said that 22 of 34 planetary vital signs are now at record extremes, indicating the accelerating disruption of the Earth's system. You can read this paper linked below. They say we are hurtling towards climate chaos. The planet's vital signs are flashing red. The consequences of human-driven alterations to the climate are no longer future threats, but are here now. Almost every corner of the biosphere is reeling from intensifying heat, storms, floods, droughts, or fires, as I'm sure you're aware. The planet is now hotter than the peak of the last interglacial, roughly 125,000 years ago, and this is showing the extreme insufficiency of global efforts. Think back to that diagram of all the COP conferences and the emissions rising, and it marks the beginning of a grim new chapter for life on Earth. Now, this is a problem. Not so much, it's more of a predicament. Climate change is often framed as a technical problem, even an engineering problem, by people like Rex Tillerson, who was a former Exxon executive and then later a Trump lackey. He said it was an engineering problem. It's not. We're in a predicament. From ecological overshoot, fossil energy dependence, and exponential economic growth, predicaments cannot be solved. They can only be responded to. So back to the Andrew Boyd Better Catastrophe flowchart. He walks you through this very eloquently here, so I'll let this play.
Kind of problem is it that we're in? And what are we in the crisis of? All right, let's take this first one. Are we in a usual kind of problem, like one that we're familiar with, a technical fix, or is Rex Tillerson, the ex-CEO of Exxon and Donald Trump's long-suffering for a short while Secretary of State would argue, climate change is an engineering problem and it has engineering solutions, which would mean that we are in a sort of familiar kind of problem. But most people think it's much more complicated and multifaceted than that. And in fact, there's a term for it, a wicked problem. That's what the sociologists and social theorists have come up with, a wicked problem. Well, you might wonder, what is a wicked problem? And here we come to one of the definitions in the flowchart. A wicked problem is a problem that 1, you can't define, 2, never ends, 3, has no right answer, i.e. no agreed upon optimum solution across all the stakeholders, is unique, i.e. so damn special that no previous problem serves as a good guide and is itself a symptom of other problems, potentially other wicked problems. Whoa. And because climate change is so gnarly, the social theorists have come up with a whole new term for it, because in this case, those seeking to solve the problem are also causing it, and time is running out. So climate change has a whole separate category that had to be invented to describe it, a qua problem, and that is as a super wicked problem. And if you're from Boston, that's like a super wicked problem, which means we're not in a problem, we're actually in a predicament, which is a very different kind of situation, because as one would expect, you can't, at least in the normal way we think of fixing problems, you can't fix a predicament.
And again, this is also reflected in planetary boundary science. So they identify about 9 to 10 planetary boundaries. This is the Potsdam Institute of Climate Impact. With Rockstrom and colleagues, they show 9 of 10 planetary boundaries. Climate change is, of course, just one of these boundaries. You can see the graph here. 7 of 9 of them, arguably more, are being crossed, have been breached, and this is operating outside the safe zone for all of human civilization. Also, overshoot. William Rees has done great work on ecological footprint modelling and overshoot. So this occurs when human demand on ecosystems exceeds the planet's ability to regenerate resources and assimilate our wastes. So overshoot is the fundamental issue and the underlying driver of the climate and nature crisis. Earth Overshoot Day for all these countries is available on this website. Also linked below, you can see how many planets we would need if everyone on the planet lived like those in your country and how much you're consuming. So the US, it's over 5 planets if everyone lived the average lifestyle of an American. I mean, this is the core of our predicament. Moving on, modern civilization expanded because of the use of fossil fuels. Population increased 8-fold since the Industrial Revolution or thereabouts, but fossil fuel consumption increased around about 1,400-fold. This could not have happened, this population increase, without abundant, cheap fossil energy. And look at these graphs. They're just exponential. Ironically, only 8 out of 10,000 generations of humans have ever lived in this most brief and notable period in human evolutionary history. Yet today's modern techno-industrial society takes this utterly anomalous growth spurt to be the norm and is doing everything conceivable to maintain it. And here's a chart here that shows GDP is proportional to oil consumption. There are no high GDP, low energy economies on the planet. So fossil fuels are invisible labour, right? And in the book, The World Without End, this French energy expert is basically showing that we are essentially superheroes with this level of energy. He calls it Armour Man. Iron Man was of course copyrighted, but we're using the power of a superhero to power our lives. So to conceptualize this, Nate Hagens from The Great Simplification has done excellent work visualizing the carbon pulse, our one-time massive consumption of fossil hydrocarbons at a pace millions of times faster that we're consuming than they were created. So we have this one-off pulse, we're riding it, and it is going to end, and then we head back towards this great simplification of our society. Of course, because of the sometimes super exponential growth, half of all fossil energy and many other essential resources ever have been used and consumed in just the past 30 to 35 years. So if you're someone my grandparents' age, I'm in my late 20s, if you're in your 80s now, about 90% of all of this fossil energy has been used in your lifetime. So your one lifetime has basically been that carbon pulse, and we're still treating it as the norm. It will not and cannot continue. So the world is far off track for the 1.5 degree Celsius target set at the Paris Agreement. No surprise, you can see it here, what we would need to do in order to decarbonise. Not going to happen. Leon Simmons, a climate scientist that works with Professor James Hansen, modelled this a while ago and said net zero CO2 by 2050 is possible if 8,500 coal plants stop burning coal, we stop heating homes, we stop driving the 1.4 billion cars in the world, planes stop flying 100,000 times a day, we stop eating tens of billions of animals per year, and we stop shipping stuff. Is that going to happen? No, of course not. That's shutting down the global economy. We can look at the opposite of this and look at the Great Acceleration. So we've shown these before here, but many human impacts began accelerating rapidly after 1950. Here we have carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, stratospheric ozone, surface temperature, ocean acidification, marine fish capture, shrimp aquaculture, coastal nitrogen, tropical forest loss, domesticated land, and terrestrial biosphere degradation. All accelerating, all showing the same pattern. And then, of course, if we look at the other side of this, world population has been accelerating, real GDP has been accelerating, foreign direct investment, woohoo, has been accelerating, urban population, primary energy use, you get the idea, right? So, human stuff now outweighs all life on Earth. The amount of plastic alone, which is made from fossil carbons, is greater in mass than all land animals and marine creatures combined. Just sit with that for a second. The amount of plastic alone is greater than mass than all land animals and marine creatures combined. Animals, 4 gigatons, plastic 8 gigatons. Plastic production is projected to triple by the year 2050. On average, every person in the world is responsible for the creation of human-made mass equal to more than their body weight each week. So this is happening now and is still happening. This isn't going to stop. Here in this graph, this was a graph by the New York Times. Humans at the bottom, there we have plants, bacteria, fungi, essentially life. And here we have human-made mass, concrete aggregates, plastics, bricks, asphalt, and metals. And you can see, yes, it outweighs it all. It's just stunning that what we've done to the biosphere while creating anthropogenic mass. And here's the chart that shows you the acceleration from the year 1900 to roughly 2020. This is for dry biomass, and this is for dry and wet anthropogenic mass and anthropogenic mass waste since the beginning of the 20th century. So, global wildlife is of course suffering. The decline in populations of wild vertebrate species between 1970 and 2020 is catastrophic. This does not mean all populations are declining, but on average of these monitored populations, we have had a 73% decline in roughly 50 years. In Latin America and the Caribbean, this is a 95% decline. A 95% decline in 50 years. It's just beyond belief. So up to 3 insect species are now becoming extinct in Australia every single week. 3 species a week of insect going extinct in Australia. A lot of these are ghost extinctions, so these species haven't even been formally described by science, and we lose them before we even discover them. The number of species at risk of extinction has recently doubled to 2 million, so they had to double the estimate for species extinctions to 2 million species going extinct. Humans are just 0.01% of all life on the planet, but we've destroyed 83% of wild mammals. And considering the total weight of mammals on Earth, 96% is now livestock and humans, and only 4% are wild mammals. So it's a polycrisis. It's a polycrisis. It is accelerating, it's interconnected, it is a predicament that we are living inside, and we cannot solve it. We can respond to it, of course, we can aim for a better catastrophe, but given what we've just discussed, it would be madness to insinuate that a green transition or any of these other vaunted solutions would address all of this. It's just not going to happen. Last year in the UK, they had a national emergency briefing on the climate and nature crisis. Kevin Anderson, I'll play a clip, is a professor of energy and climate change at the universities of Manchester, Uppsala and Bergen, and he said the choice is between rapid, deep, fair decarbonisation of modern society and an organised-ish technical and social revolution, or ongoing rhetoric and delay as temperatures continue to rise, and then we'll have a revolutionary style change that will be both chaotic and violent. So that sums it up really, doesn't it?
If we measure the concentration of carbon dioxide in parts per million, and we look at that across the last, say, 800,000 years and compare that with today, we see a plot that looks like this. Now that has a variation in that of about 100 parts per million going up and down, basically related to the ice ages. If we then focus in on the last 10,000 years, and that's the time when human societies have really flourished, what we see then is a pathway that is much more stable in carbon dioxide. The variation has only been about 20 parts per million in that period of time. And so we've had a very stable temperature and a very stable climate during the flourishing of our societies. If we then look at the end of this, and so this is really where we began to burn fossil fuels in about 1850-ish. And we were about 280 parts per million by volume at that particular time. And if we look at that where we are today, we're now at 424 parts per million, almost overnight. We've gone to these ridiculously high levels, and it's rising rapidly every single year. The way the society is going at the moment, we're going to see a rise of about 2 degrees centigrade or so by the middle of this century. That's very hard to imagine that we'll be any less than that. But there's now a small but very real risk that we could hit 4 degrees centigrade by the end of this century. Now, the prospects of 3 and 4 degrees centigrade of warming are absolutely dire. I mean, we cannot risk that at all. It is an extreme and unstable climate, far beyond any safe zone that has nurtured our civilization. And we're going to be seeing unprecedented societal and ecological collapse at these sorts of levels. We can see escalating geopolitical instability and rising military tensions. And there will be no real economy to talk about. There's no reduction in GDP. We'll be looking at systemic collapse.
The government needs to urgently brief the public on the climate and nature emergency. That's what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to tell you we can step in and make all of this go away, but we need to know the facts and we need to be prepared for these shocks that are going to happen. So don't leave it to activists. Climate disruption affects food production, affects public health, affects infrastructure, affects national security, affects economic stability. Most governments are still treating climate breakdown, most media organisations are still treating climate breakdown as a separate environmental policy issue. It's an everything crisis. It is a threat multiplier. So back to Andrew Boyd's Better Catastrophe, why bother? And we'll play this briefly. Why bother? Maybe you're sort of seeing all of this and you're becoming a bit fatalistic, or you're saying, oh, well, I'm a science denier, I don't believe any of this, I'm not going to do anything, or it's so bad, I'm a quote-unquote doomer, I'm not going to do anything. Both of those, I would argue, are wrong and we should be taking action. And here are some reasons why.
Bother to buy time, because we can still help things get less worse more slowly. We got to pick up that burden. Or maybe because we have kids, which begs the question, but should we even bring kids into such a world? Many people are saying yes. Other people are saying, oops, I already did. Those that already did. In both cases, we need them to know that we did all that we could to preserve, to secure a livable world for them. Others are saying, no, we shouldn't bring kids into such a world. In fact, the Earth is better off without us, which is not a great sort of survival strategy for the species, but you can understand where people are coming from. And that leads us back on our worst case scenario, endgame track, where the twilight of humanity. So let's come back to why bother. A different answer is survival. I rebel against my extinction, as tens of millions of young people are across the world, taking that attitude and rising up. Why bother hope? I choose hope. Why bother solidarity? I can't lose hope when other people, more vulnerable, more people people who are more in the front lines of climate impacts can't afford to lose hope. Wait, or can I? I'll add that burden to your pile. So why bother? Because of legacy, which is a very powerful motivator for a lot of people. One way to think about it is, what kind of ancestor do you want to be? And you have two choices. You can be a dick or not a dick. And if you choose to be a dick kind of ancestor, then I invite you to let the eyes of the future, of future generations, bore hard into your skull. What decisions are you going to make in this critical decade that will have consequences across the future of humanity? All these unborn people who will have to live with that. Let them bore into your skull and re-ask the question, what kind of ancestor do you want to be? Maybe not a dick. And then pick up that burden. Finally, why bother? For simple reason of living with moral integrity. As eco-philosopher Kathleen Dean Moore points out, channeling Immanuel Kant here, German philosopher of centuries past, she argues we must do what's right simply because it's right. And the obvious rejoinder to that is, must we? And a lot of people are like, no, let's just party like it's 2099 again. But yes, we must, because we don't have a right to ask whether we're going to succeed or not. The only question we have a right to ask, as a poet, philosopher, environmentalist, and farmer Wendell Berry would say, is what does the earth require of us if we want to continue to live on it? But many people want to know, but will we? Will we turn this around? Don't ask. Wendell Berry has just told us. Other people are answering, will we be able to turn this around? Maybe. Bill McKibben says it depends on whether we have a movement, a social movement across all sectors of society that's, just growing into its power and using the tools of democracy to turn things around. If we do that, then we have a chance. So let's get busy, Bill McKibben says. Others, alas, no, we can't turn things around. The world has already made other plans. So what now? A great question. Which all of these lead us back to, we must awake to our burdens.
So I live in New Zealand. New Zealand needs a national emergency briefing. We must nationalise climate emergency science communication. We need national emergency briefings. We have had a quasi one called The Reality of Everything, which you can see in the description, which was expert talks about the polycrisis, but this needs to be pressed in the media as headline news. Climate and ecological breakdown, it must be a front page news issue. So we'll briefly cover this again. We've talked about this in previous videos, but it's what some would call the most important graph in the world. It is from NASA data on the Earth's energy imbalance, and that measures the difference, between incoming solar radiation and the outgoing heat from the Earth. A positive imbalance means heat is accumulating in the climate system. And you can see since the year 2004, this has nearly tripled in that time. So we're accumulating massive amounts of heat. Again, this is the Earth's energy imbalance over the last 150,000 years. So we're going up, we're going down, it's fluctuating. To 2020, it's on a rocket ship 2020 onwards, it is just going bonkers. This is why we are seeing so much more extreme weather lately. You might think, surely this wasn't all happening even 5 years ago this much. Like, do we just have more cell phones now? Sometimes I get told, oh, it's because, yeah, everyone has a phone, so we see more of it. This has always been happening. No, it hasn't. They track this on satellites. Rates of extreme wildfires have about doubled in the past 20 years. I mean, look at this. Satellite observations again show energy imbalance, like I said, has nearly tripled in the past 2 decades. The ocean stores an estimated 91% of the excess heat energy trapped inside the Earth's climate system by excess greenhouse gases. Again, look at this graph. North Atlantic sea surface temperature anomalies, off the charts. The rate is accelerating, so climate change isn't about the average temperature per se. What's important is the rate of change. The rate of change may as well be the fastest in the entire history of the planet. The entire 4.6 billion year history, this is the fastest rate of change. Recent research published in Nature shows the global temperature has increased from about 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade to roughly 0.35 C per decade, just in recent years. So this means the 1.5 threshold is on track to be breached, and James Hansen has come out publicly and said 2C is dead. Again, this is what it looks like. You can see the acceleration for yourself. This was published in the New York Times. Again, the headline 4 billion death warning from the Institute of Faculties and Actuaries and the University of Exeter. This doesn't mean this is going to happen, but this is a risk assessment of what these cascading tipping points could lead to. And they say in this report, again, warming accelerated in 2023, temperatures passed 1.5 C, they briefly hit 2 C that year, and they say this is driving more severe impacts, increasing tipping point risks, and global emissions continue to increase, and greenhouse gases are at record levels, meaning further warming in the pipeline, because of course this has lags in the system. Also, Earth's climate sensitivity is much higher than thought. So this is how much the Earth responds to the climate forcings we put into it. So they say in this report that net zero carbon budgets will not achieve the temperature goals of the Paris Agreement. Additional factors such as aerosol cooling, so think like aerosols from smoke or from emissions from cruise ships, for example, and albedo loss, so the reflectivity of the planet decreasing, are also accelerating the warming. So they say prepare for implications of faster than expected warming and overshoot, urgently revisit carbon budgets and decarbonisation pathways. This uncertainty implies a need for prudence and a critical review of assumptions and account for additional factors driving warming such as aerosol cooling. This is what that looks like. Essentially, this is the past 130,000 years. We're oscillating backwards and forwards, we're going into cold periods, we then hit a stable Holocene climate that you can see right here where our civilization has developed under, and now again we've essentially hit a brick wall and this rocket ship of greenhouse gas and aerosol forcing, all of which has not yet fully caught up with us. More charts to labour the point. As I mentioned, we passed 2 degrees briefly. We reached 2.07 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial average on 18th of November 2023. That's what that looks like, a huge anomaly. Antarctic sea ice went way off the charts that year, no surprise as to why. Total fire carbon emissions for Canada went way off the charts, again, no surprise as to why. There's a bunch of literature out there on paleoclimate data and past mass extinction events. Most of them, apart from the most famous one, the asteroid killing the dinosaurs, were caused by climate change triggered greenhouse gas events. So the worst one, the end-Permian extinction event, otherwise known as the Great Dying, was 252 million years ago. Temperatures rose 8 C over 60,000 years and left with most of life on Earth dead. We are warming the planet about 27 times or even faster than that event. So this is just astounding rates of change. This is an old number, but I'm sure you can go and find the recent ones, calculated by Prof. Elliot Jacobson. And he says the planet is currently heating at a rate of 13.3 Hiroshima nuclear bombs per second, or over 1.15 million Hiroshima nuclear bombs per day, And the oceans, again, they absorb 90% of that heat. So they're heating at a rate of over 12 Hiroshima bombs per second. This is like everybody on the planet running 88 microwaves per person on high 24/7, or 55 hair dryers. These are pink ones. Woo! 55 hair dryers for every person on the planet. So we all have 55 octopus arms, all blaring hair dryers on high 24/7, and the rate is accelerating. So we'll soon have more than 55 each. So these clips, again, we've played some of these, but these are happening daily. This is before we have crossed 1.5 degrees Celsius. And remember, these changes are non-linear, so it doesn't just gradually get worse. It gets much worse, much faster. Unprecedented heat waves like we've seen across Europe, extreme rainfall events like these clips in China, droughts, wildfires, marine heat waves. These are happening daily. I cannot keep track of how many of these there are at this point. This is not a future problem. But you're thinking, surely it can't be that bad, can it? Well, again, let's go back to this climate risk report from the Institute of Faculties and Actuaries, the Planetary Solvency Report. They mention things like climate targets often rely on probabilities such as a 50% chance of avoiding 2 degrees of warming. And to give you an idea, that's hundreds to thousands of times riskier than the financial industry or the nuclear power industry would accept as risks for failure in their businesses or in their operations. In Appendix 1 of this report, the actuaries say 3 degrees or more by 2050 would trigger multiple climate tipping points, creating a tipping cascade, like a domino effect, would cause the breakdown of several critical ecosystem services and Earth systems and lead to high level of extinction of higher order life on Earth. And of course, that would cause significant socio-political fragmentation worldwide and or state failure with rapid, enduring, and significant loss of capital, as if that even matters at that point, and frequent large-scale mortality events. So you may have heard of things like wet bulb temperatures, where the human body starts cooking from the inside out as humidity is high, about 100%, and temperatures get higher than our internal body temperature. If it's only 2 degrees, the actuaries say a high number of climate tipping points are still triggered, and we get a partial tipping cascade. We still get a breakdown of some ecosystem services and Earth systems, major extinction events in multiple geographies, and ocean circulation severely impacted, severe socio-political fragmentation, low-lying regions lost, heat and water stress drive involuntary mass migration of billions, and catastrophic mortality events from disease, nutrition, thirst, and conflict. That's the 2-degree world James Hansen has said we are crashing into. I mean, we're still getting headlines like this from The Guardian saying, daunting but doable. Europe urged to prepare for 3 degrees of global heating. I'm sorry, this is obscene to say it's daunting but doable. Climate Crisis, Allianz SE, one of these heads of this world's largest insurance company, said the climate crisis is on track to destroy capitalism. And he argued, now that it's on track to ensure capitalism, we have to save the conditions under which markets operate. I mean, this is life on Earth we're talking about. I mean, there's no markets on a dead planet. They're starting to figure this out. It gets buried, of course. The Guardian ran the headline that GDP would be hit by 50% between 2070 and 2090. Buried further down the article is the small detail that 3C or more of heating by 2050, there could be more than 4 billion deaths. This was reported in websites here in New Zealand, interest.co.nz. Again, they buried it completely. The Otago Daily Times has run communication on this, buried again. This is not saying this is a certainty that's going to happen, but this level of risk we're playing with and not taking this seriously is bonkers. It's an understatement. Estimated deaths in some climate risk scenarios at around 2 degrees by 2050, which I would argue we're on track for well and truly, could reach 800 million people. So maybe it's not 4 billion, maybe it's only 800 million. The estimated combined total mortality for World War I and World War II is about 77 to 100 million deaths. So a better case scenario is 8 times worse than World War II. It means even lower bound catastrophic climate scenarios result in just staggering amounts of death. And you can see all of this in these reports. Again, they're all linked. Why isn't the IPCC saying this? We're looking 25 years and beyond. So German scientists, the German Physical Society and the German Meteorological Society said it's not a forecast in a strict sense that we could hit 3 degrees by 2050, but current satellite observations give reason to fear that such extreme warming is possible. And in fact, the risk of 3 degrees by 2050 falls within the IPCC's worst case scenarios, and these German scientists say, quote, unfortunately, recent data aligns more closely with those scenarios. David Suzuki has covered this as well, linked below. We do power a new civilization on whatever energy we have left, we'll just arguably use it to continue consuming, polluting, and wrecking the planet. So we need to scale down. We need degrowth. We are getting degrowth either way. It's whether we attempt a managed, like the professor earlier said, a managed-ish social revolution or a catastrophic and violent collapse. So tipping points. We haven't really covered these in detail, but climate tipping points occur when these gradual climate changes trigger abrupt system shifts. So these are like the Greenland ice sheet melting, the Amazon rainforest dying and switching into a savanna, the collapse of ocean circulation systems. Earth is on the verge of 5 catastrophic climate tipping points, which are in effect domino effects, which would lead to these really extreme scenarios. So last year, this came out and said that the planet's first catastrophic climate tipping point has been reached with the catastrophic dieback of warm water coral reefs. So unless global warming is reduced to 1.2 degrees Celsius as fast as possible, warm water coral reefs will not remain at any meaningful scale. And this was a report by 160 scientists from 23 countries. So if we zoom out, this is from sort of a seminal paper on these tipping points. And you can see a lot of them are estimated to tip at below 2 degrees. Then we crashed through a lot more at 2 to 4. Arguably at 2 to 4 degrees we have set off enough feedbacks that we keep going higher, and then we set off even more feedbacks that self-reinforce and amplify above 4 degrees. So this is that domino effect. There was a recent paper out in Nature in the last couple of weeks that said the rate of change is a huge factor in this. So it's not just crossing these temperature thresholds, it's how fast we cross them. So they estimated for the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, that keeps the UK and Western Europe sort of a livable climate. This could be breached as low as a 2 degree threshold if our rate of warming is going above 0.3 per decade, which it is. So we could be breaching these irreversible tipping points very, very soon. And here's some graphics showing where the uncertainty is for where we cross these tipping points. Of course, when we cross these, this results in natural feedbacks overtaking us, so we no longer become in control of the situation, so our emissions will be dwarfed by the natural feedbacks. An example of this is the Arctic's vast carbon sink becoming a source of emissions, or the Amazon rainforest crossing a tipping point and becoming a source of emissions. There have been recent studies as well showing that in past rapid changes of the Earth's climate, it offset any greening effect of trees enjoying the elevated levels of CO2, and in fact the trees died out and desertified and not evolve fast enough to keep up. A recent study, The Guardian covered this here, you can read in more detail, but they found that Earth's plants and soils reached peak carbon dioxide sequestration in 2008 and has been declining ever since. So we would need to be reducing our emissions year on year just to stand still, but instead we've been increasing them year on year. They found, a little bit more detail, they found emissions now need to fall by 0.3% per year just to stand still, and that's a tall order since typically they increase by 1.2% per year. Again, here's some impacts in New Zealand where I live, and New Zealand's glaciers have already lost a third of their ice as more vanishes, landscapes and lives change, they say. Here's the Franz Josef Glacier, in just a matter of years getting obliterated. Ironically, the region promotes glacier helicopter tourism. A time-lapse here from the Victoria University of Wellington between 2012 and 2019, receding by up to 2 metres a day. It's just astonishing. We'll just run through some recent science on what's been happening. In the past couple of weeks, satellite data revealed a 400,000 hectare fire no one noticed burning in the Australian outback. We also have New Zealand dropping all mention of climate change from the year 0 to 10 school curriculum, despite it being an earlier draft. So that's all the way up to 15-year-olds at high school not being explicitly taught about climate change. We have recent news stories showing potatoes are boiling in the ground as a heat wave is pummeling Asia. We have the oceans are breaking their all-time heat record, which is threatening another one of these critical carbon sinks, as the oceans do store a lot of this carbon for us and buffer us. We are also seeing July 2026 was the hottest month ever recorded in the US. The world's seas hit the hottest temperature on record for July in 2026. And if we go further, the recent fires in Canada, 102 wildfires a few weeks ago were raging across British Columbia. Here's some clips of that. Forced 22,000 people to flee in evacuations in Summerland, BC. Cuttlefish in Australia are seeing fears of a catastrophic decline of the giant Australian cuttlefish, and they've counted only 44 in a dive survey. Another analysis showed ABC, CBS and NBC aired nearly 200 segments about 3 recent US heat events in the States this year, and they never mentioned climate change. Moving on, the same professor, Professor Elliot Jacobson, did this quick analysis on this upcoming El Nino, the super El Nino we're about to experience. Prof. Elliot Jacobson found this year's coming super El Nino as a 1 in 12.5 million chance event without climate change. It is off the fucking charts. And just one more, we're just crashing through loss of coral reefs. We've had a 48% loss of hard coral since 1980 in the Caribbean. The coming decades, a world at 2.6 degrees means global disaster, and that was Bill Hare, the CEO of Climate Analytics. A world this hot would probably trigger major tipping points and would cause the collapse of the Atlantic Ocean circulation, the loss of coral reefs, the long-term deterioration of ice sheets, and the conversion of the Amazon rainforest to a savanna. So these are these tipping points. That's what we're looking at. That means the end of agriculture in the UK. That means the end of agriculture in the UK and across Europe, drought and monsoon failure in Asia and Africa, lethal heat and humidity. He said, this is not a good place to be. You want to stay away from that. I agree. That's not a good place to be. The last 11 years were some of the hottest ever on Earth. The Guardian recently reported the UK may be one shot away from food riots. The UK must stockpile food in readiness for climate and war shocks exasperating each other, and when they're particularly vulnerable to it. A large majority of the experts, 80%, said large-scale violence caused by a food crisis was possible within the next 50 years, and 40% of them said it could occur within the next decade. So large-scale violence caused by a food crisis within the next decade in the UK. The scenario considered was more than 30,000 people suffering violent injury over the course of a year owing to food protests or riots. We've also had worse than expected, sooner than projected sea level rise. Global sea levels have been underestimated due to poor modelling. This paper in Nature shows that on average sea levels are 30 centimetres higher than thought, and up to 150 centimetres higher in Southeast Asia and the Indo-Pacific. Last year, the US was rocked by 4 1-in-1,000-year storms in less than a week. Extreme heat, it was estimated, could lead to 30,000 deaths a year in England and Wales by the 2070s, which would be a 50-fold rise in heat-related deaths. a 50-fold rise in heat-related deaths. We are seeing a catastrophic loss of marine life. Another study showing that fish levels are falling by 7.2% with as little as 0.1 degrees of warming per decade. So remember, we're at 0.35 now per decade. So losing catastrophic amounts of marine life. Maybe all of this is still washing over your head, but you care about chocolate. Cocoa trees could be destroyed with climate change in these cocoa-producing regions of Africa. We're also looking at rising carbon dioxide levels in our human blood. So, you might have read plastic is in our blood. So the government's not stupid, right? And the UK government in particular, MI5, MI6, the heads of UK intelligence in the UK, provided this report to Keir Starmer and the government on global biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and national security. This report was due to be released by Number 10 Downing Street in 2025, but was suppressed and only released partially after a Freedom of Information request. And the King was meant to attend this event. That's how serious it was. They warned that climate change could drive mass migration to Britain and trigger a nuclear war in Asia as the Indus River basin dried out. Like I said, the report was blocked by Number 10 for being too negative. The decline of forest and glacier-fed rivers, they thought, would lead to the global competition for food beginning in the 2030s, and the same risk assessment said every critical ecosystem is on a pathway to collapse, which means irreversible loss of function beyond repair. So the internal version also warned that collapsing ecosystems could motivate acts of eco-terrorism in Britain, as well as drawing NATO into conflicts over the remaining breadbasket, think Russia and Ukraine. Described as a reasonable worst-case scenario, the report said that many ecosystems in the world are in fact so stressed that they could soon pass a tipping point, after which they would inexorably degrade no matter what humans did to protect them. Forests in Canada, they said, might pass this tipping point by 2030, as might glaciers in the Himalayas that feed over 2 billion people, that feed rivers on which over 2 billion people depend on. Intelligence chiefs warned that the decline of the Himalayan rivers in particular would almost certainly escalate tensions between China, India and Pakistan and potentially lead to nuclear war. The government, said one insider close to the report, is hiding the true danger of climate change from the people. We have to have an honest conversation about the risks we face, our prosperity and how to mitigate them. So, as I've said before, attend this 4 billion dead Zoom call. And in your personal life, just talk about it. If you don't tell people you care, they will assume you don't. But if you talk about it, people will start to care and act like they do too. So just talk about it. You don't have to solve this problem. I would argue it can't be solved anyway. We can make it better. And one thing we can all do immediately is to talk about it. There's all these other actions online, plant-based diets, joining activist groups, taking direct action. You've heard all that before. Talking about it can be done every day. You have agency. You do have agency, so use it. As we have mentioned before, a global average of 89% feel that governments should do more to fight global warming, so you have huge support. If you know an MP, a member of parliament, a politician in your country, this is a vote winner. Tell them to go really hard on it. It is not political suicide to care about the livability of the planet before corporate profits. And yes, I would really encourage you to read I Want a Better Catastrophe, or at the very least go to the interactive and animated flowchart. It's great, it helps you navigate this. What do I do if it is a catastrophe? There's arguments to be made that telling people scary, bad news is cause to give up. I'd argue the default is inaction anyway. And so if this is getting to you, you're connecting with it emotionally, you can take action. It will reduce the anxiety and stress you feel, you will connect with other people who get it, and you will achieve a better catastrophe. Even just by being aware of this, we're able to achieve a better catastrophe than going into this future blind and clueless about what's coming for us. So yes, please attend this Zoom call. I believe they happen every month. This one is August the 18th UK time, That's the very top link in the description, and I would love to see you there.